Hey everybody, this is an experiment. There's been no forethought, no script, no rehearsal. This is just a stream of consciousness exploration of the job interview question. Tell me about yourself. Let's go. Okay, tell me about yourself. You know, it's interesting because the thing that first occurs to me when we talk about job interview questions like this is that this is one of the standard job interview questions that they've been using for God knows how long. And they all have the same problem. And the same problem that they have is that they are terrible. They do not do a good job at all of assessing a candidate. They really don't. You know, many years ago when I was a much younger man and I was looking for jobs, and you would go to job interviews and you would get these questions. And they used to annoy the hell out of me because, first of all, I'm an introvert. I'm a detail-oriented person. I'm a technical-oriented person. And like a lot of you out there, the whole world is not solely made up of extroverts, although some extroverts think this, but that's not true. There's a lot of introverts. They don't make a lot of noise, but they're there. And quite frankly, they're the ones doing a lot of the actual work. And they're the ones that are doing a lot of the technical work. So anyway, no offense to a lot of extroverts, but you know, introverts matter. And the problem was, if you went for a technical type job, okay? Now, if you were someone that didn't have a lot of experience going to job interviews, the natural assumption was that when you get to the job interview, they're going to ask you different types of questions. They're going to ask you questions about, you know, for example, how many years experience do you have doing this type of work? Could you tell us about the type of work you do? Even some things like, you know, could you tell us what elements of this role that you enjoy more than others? Things like this. You know, speaking for myself, I wouldn't have had a problem answering those types of questions. And when you study for a job interview or you prepare yourself, a lot of the preparation was basically being able to answer questions like that, questions about your job, questions about the work that you do, the reasoning behind things. And you were, you know, you were expected to be able to demonstrate your knowledge of the job so that you could make a great case for yourself in the interview that you were qualified. And that's what you were expecting. Now, when you actually end up going to a job interview, instead of getting questions like that, you would get questions like, tell me about yourself. And usually the first thing they say, and, you know, like a lot of people who are technically minded or who are detail oriented, this question really throws them because, first of all, it is so non-specific. It could be literally asking you about anything, right? How would you answer, tell me about yourself? Well, you could say, you know, here's my height, here's my weight, here's my eye color. You know, you could give, here's my blood type. You could talk about stuff like that. Or you could talk about, you know, this is my favorite color. This is my favorite number. This is the, you know, my favorite type of food. This is my favorite type of entertainment, like movie to watch or something. You could talk about that. Or, you know, you could talk about, you could essentially give them information that's on your resume. You know, this is my professional summary. I've had experience here. I've done this kind of work, this kind of training, this kind of education. You know, there's literally a whole universe of completely different things you could say to answer this question. You could talk about, you know, more of your emotional side and your aspirational side, what your ambitions are, and, you know, what types of work you like to do and what you find inspirational and things like this. There's so many ways you could come at that question, you know, and still give a full and complete answer to it, but have it be completely different, you know. And like I've said about 7 times so far, being a detail-oriented person, being an introvert, being a technically minded person, I used to hate questions like this. Because there's a couple of things going on. First of all, when you got to the job interview and you had sent them a resume and presumably they had read your resume because they invited you to come in for an interview, that the assumption was that they'd actually looked at your resume or your job application, if you'd filled in forms and things like this. Then for you to show up and they say, tell me about yourself, as if they don't know anything about you, it felt insulting. It felt, disrespectful. And that was the first thing that, probably the first reaction that I would have internally when I heard that question. It was like, does this mean that you haven't looked at my resume and you haven't looked at my application and you just called me here at random? You don't actually know who I am? Is that why you're asking me the question? Because I can't think of another obvious reason why you would ask me that. It's like being invited to a party and getting an invitation and they're saying, we'd very much like you to come to our party, because we're very happy with who you are, and we think very highly of you, and we've known each other a very long time, so we would love for you to be there. Please come. And then you show up and they say, hi, who the hell are you? It takes you aback. So that was kind of the first thing that went through my head. And then the second thing that also I have to admit, would frustrate me, internally, it would frustrate me, is that it's such a general question. I don't know how to answer that. It's a question where, the person asking it doesn't tell you what they're looking for, but they're obviously looking for something. And I understand that in life there are situations where you'd want to do that. I get that, but it's still kind of a strange thing to do to somebody. And especially if you're recruiting for a technically minded position with a technical person or an introvert or a detail-oriented person, that's not the type of question that you would ask. For example, there's a whole slew of these questions, and they all have this in common. Things like, why should we hire you? Well, the obvious answer to that is because you're looking for a person. You said you wanted someone who has these qualifications, and I have them, right? Or they would say, well, where do you see yourself in 5 years? If you asked an autistic person that question, someone who was on the autism spectrum, who has high functioning autism or Asperger's, they would probably have a very hard time with the question, because when you think about that question literally, where do you see yourself in 5 years? There could be a million things that would happen between now and then that I have no control over. How am I supposed to tell you that? Do I have a crystal ball of what's going to happen in the future? No, of course I don't. So those type of people, especially technically minded people, detail-oriented people, and possibly introverts who maybe they don't have quite the developed social skills that the typical extrovert has, they would not handle these questions very well. They have no idea how to answer them, and they can't guess in the moment why strategically they'd be asked that. Is it to demonstrate something? Is it to get at some bigger question that's behind the question, right? So I would get very upset with these questions, and consequently, I wouldn't be able to answer them very well. And it always struck me as rather ridiculous, as I know a lot of people who watch my YouTube channel, they feel the same way. It strikes them as ridiculous that you would apply for a job, and a job requires a lot of qualifications that are not easy to get. Okay, they might look for paper qualifications, they might look for a lot of experience. These things are not easy to get. You might have taken you many, many years to accumulate these, and sending in a resume showing that you have been hired in positions of responsibility and positions that take a lot of skill. That's a reflection of your abilities. If you have a resume that has like a lot of, management positions, or a lot of important positions like high-level sales positions, or whatever you've got, those say something about your capabilities and your worthiness as a potential employee. And then for someone to say, to signal that almost they don't respect any of that by asking you a question like tell me why I should hire you, after you've shown them like, here, I have all of this, and this happens to be kind of what you're looking for them to then ask you a question like that, it really takes people aback. And it really reinforces to me how HR, especially in the recruitment and selection function, it really does a terrible job of being able to assess people. I think that's the core of this. It seems like in the last 50 years, my impression, sort of having to deal with HR throughout my career, not as my main thing, but kind of a thing that's always there. And then having taught HR at universities, you really realize, at least I have, I get the impression that HR does a terrible job at being able to assess people. And if these questions weren't bad enough, they are asked a lot of times by people who have no technical understanding of the job whatsoever. So that makes it even worse, because if you show up for your job interview, you're ready to discuss your experience and to demonstrate how you are qualified and how you know the subject matter and the material, and you have a lot of experience, and you rattle off a lot of examples and cases, from your past that demonstrate your handling of various issues and various types of work. You come prepared with all this stuff, but then, first of all, you're talking to a person that works for HR, meaning that they don't understand any technical details of the job itself. So any case you could make for yourself on a technical basis seems to kind of go over their head a lot of times. And instead, the interview is about your communication skills, your interpersonal skills, your likability, things like this. And this is common knowledge and everybody knows this, but I'm coming from the perspective of a job seeker that is not an HR person and hasn't studied this stuff to the nth degree. It's quite unintuitive, it's quite frustrating, and it's completely ineffective. We do such a terrible job of assessing employees or potential employees. This has been HR's problem for a very long time, and it's only getting more acute as we go into the future. Now, 30 years ago, people believed in training. People did not, they didn't move around as much as they do now. Okay. Like if you look at some of the metrics, like, the average length of employment for any one company. So the average amount of time that you would stay with any one company, that used to be something like 20 years, like a generation ago. And it's gone down. When I was very young, it was something like 7 years. And now it's probably 4 or 5 years, if not shorter. People are moving around more often. And as a result, no employer wants to train employees. They want to hire people that, from day one, they can get started. They know their job. They can get started with no training necessary. And as a result, that makes the ability to pick employees that much more important. Because even if you picked someone in the past that really wasn't that qualified, you could still train them. Unfortunately, that sort of safety net is largely going away, and you need to have picked the right person that can just day one, they can start doing the job. And but yet we're still using questions like "tell me about yourself" that are ancient. They've been around for decades and decades. Since at least the 1970s, all these questions come from. That's already 50 years ago. And we're still using these questions to try and assess people. And not only have the requirements for recruiters gone down over the last 50 years, but we're still using these ancient techniques that don't really work. And this is well known, actually. This is well known that questions like "tell me about yourself" and all the other standard job interview questions, they actually do a terrible job of assessing an employee, assessing their not only their technical skills, but their social skills and their personal skills. Think about what is the core of my YouTube channel that a lot of you guys watch. It's how to answer job interview questions like this. Now, when you think about it, why should a person who is highly qualified for a job have to go on the internet and, take a crash course in how to answer certain job interview questions to pass a job interview for a job that they're qualified for? That's silly. you have two candidates, A and B, and they're both really qualified for the job. Or maybe candidate B is a little more qualified for the job. They're more experienced, they're more educated, maybe they're smarter. And candidate A will win and get the job because they went on the internet and learned how to learn some snappy answers to these standard questions. And that gets them the job. When you think about it, that's silly. It shouldn't work like that. Unfortunately, it does. And there are some reasons why that's the case. Some of them are legitimate reasons, but some of them are silly reasons that are easily avoidable. And that is the way we choose to conduct interviews, by asking things like this. It's silly. It really is. So tell me about yourself. It's a little bit of like a symbol of everything that's wrong with the job interview process as a way of assessing a candidate. And to demonstrate this theory, if you want to call it that, when you look at smaller companies and you look at companies that are like 100 employees or less, and you look at how they do job interviews, generally speaking, it's less structured. The owner of the company might take you out to lunch and have lunch with you. And over an hour and a half, instead of like saying things like, so tell me about yourself, instead of doing that, they'll have an actual free-flowing conversation, a two-way conversation with you. And they'll say like, so tell me, what do you think of this? And then the person starts talking, say, oh yeah, why is that? Have you found this? What's your attitude towards this? Have you encountered this yet or not? And you have this wonderful conversation going. And I would argue, okay, that you can assess a person so much more effectively by having that two-way conversation with someone who is not only the hiring authority, but someone who actually has a good grasp of the technicalities of the job that they're interviewing for, okay? And they also understand the business context of that role. So they, even though they didn't go to business school, even though they've never been formally taught how to interview somebody with all these silly little rules and practices, I would argue that they do a much better job in general doing it that way than doing the modern recruiter-based standardized job interview with questions like, tell me about yourself. It is so much more effective. Now, that alone should cause some concern in HR circles. Why can a business owner who's never been to business school, never taken HR training, do a better job judging candidates and selecting a candidate than a recruiter who is supposedly, allegedly skilled in such things by using all these unintuitive interview techniques that include some of these cookie cutter questions that have been around forever. That's one of the ironies of this whole thing. So if any of you are frustrated about the job interview process, if you feel that you're perfectly qualified for a job and you were disqualified for something silly that was a misrepresentation, or they disqualified you for something totally superficial right off the hop, that they never even got to seeing your value, I have a lot of sympathy for you. I have a lot of empathy too, because that's the state of recruiting today. And when you have things like ghosting, which has been on the rise, where recruiters, and I'm talking about when recruiters ghost candidates, that's been on the rise in the last 10 years. It's sort of come in with a lot of social media and stuff as HR has gone on the internet and embraced social media and new practices. They've also embraced a lot of practices like that, like ghosting people, which didn't used to be there, at least certainly not as prevalent as they are now. And so all of this contributes to having a pretty terrible experience for candidates when they're going through a job search process. The first part of the process is, sort of discovering the jobs, and the second part is applying for them. And the third part, you could argue, is the interview process, if you get called for an interview. and there's problems with the first two, but the third part, this interviewing process, this is what a lot of people are up against. And I've worked with large organizations like a global enterprise, and I've worked with very small operations, companies that have like 20 people in it and stuff, and everything in between, and several things in between across different industries. And this is what I've seen. I've seen a lot of large organizations use this formalized interview process that is supposedly superior because it's more learned. It supposedly incorporates a lot of principles from psychology, sociology, and interviewing, and it's taking all this learning from different areas and condensing it down, and then they write this playbook on how to do interviews, and the end result is really terrible, in my opinion, because I've seen the alternative to that, which is smaller business where they don't have this. And it seems the quality of employees that they get and the amount of work they get out of them, and the amount that those employees are engaged and all this kind of stuff is so far superior. So it's very unfortunate. So this is a stream of consciousness video, so I don't really have a central point other than to say that tell me about yourself is a silly question. And if you go to an interview where the first question they ask is tell me about yourself, I don't think that's the end of the world in itself, but it is a red flag as far as I'm concerned, especially if this is asked by a recruiter as opposed to a hiring manager or business owner. Because they're playing this game of, they're asking a question behind the question. They're playing mind games. And unfortunately, in order to get through that process, in my opinion, we need to learn these cookie cutter answers to these standard questions. It's kind of silly, but that's the need for it. And hopefully, at the end of that process, once you get past the HR people and the recruiters and the silly mind games and the tell me about yourself questions, at the end of it, there's a good job with a reasonable boss, intelligent coworkers, and a good atmosphere, a good culture at the end of it. So hopefully that's the case. So hopefully you found this somewhat interesting. I'm sorry for rambling. That's kind of the point of this. I just wanted to see if I could do a video without any preparation, just sort of giving spontaneous thoughts and reacting to a topic. You guys let me know what you thought, if this is something I should do in future, or it was just, first of all, you turned it off after 10 seconds, or it was insufferable and pointless and rambling and of no value. Let me know what your thoughts are, and that'll inform whether I do more of these in the future. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention. You guys are awesome. I feel your pain when you go through job interview processes. And it's something that nobody seems to talk about or nobody seems to address properly, in my opinion. But thank you for your attention. You guys are awesome. Take care. I'll see you on the next one.